All right, Friday's here and couldn't be more happy to have it. That means it's time for the Morning Pitt Mailbag. This is what we do every Friday. We take questions from Pitt fans on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com and answer as many as we can right here in the mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I said this every week. This is what we do. We take questions throughout the week on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. I always say this is my favorite episode of the Morning Pitt to do each week. Partially because I do a little research. It's not completely going into a blind. I'll look at the questions ahead of time, but whereas I'm trying to think of topics and things to talk about all week long, I get to the Friday episode of the Morning Pitt and I don't have to think of the topics. You guys are on top of it, and I appreciate you for that. So thanks everybody who submitted questions this week. We've got some great questions. We'll start off with one question left over from last week, and then we'll dive into this week's questions and try and get through as many as we can because we've got some great questions. I'm looking forward to it. So let's do it. Morning Pitt Mailbag here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Friday here on the Morning Pitt, the mailbag edition on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know we always ask you to do like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you'll never miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content, whether it's our these Morning Pitt videos that we do every day of the week, Monday through Friday, our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. With me and Jim Hammett, and comments and questions from you, our post-game shows, interviews, whatever it might be. We get a lot of video content here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and the way to make sure you never miss any of it is to like this video and subscribe. Subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can turn on notifications so you can get alerts sent to your phone every time we go live or every time we post new content, and that's a good way for you to make sure you don't miss it. So youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the place to be. What else? Oh, Panther-Lair.com. Oh, yeah. The website, the mothership, Panther-Lair.com, the place to get all the Pitt video content you can possibly or not Pitt video content. I'm mixing up my reads. I call them reads, even though I'm just saying it off the top of my head. The place to get all the Pitt coverage, Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, transfers, all that stuff. We covered at Panther-Lair.com, and, of course, the message boards where you can hang out with other Pitt fans all day, every day, and talk about Pitt sports. Go check it out. If you're a Pitt fan, it's the place you want to be, Panther-Lair.com. All right, let's jump into our questions. And actually, we had one question left over from this week. We'll have to tread lightly with this one, but we'll answer it all the same. Pitt77ME says, I see that we've recruited and have had several commitments from outside the country. Do you believe this is taking a risk with the current government attitude toward immigrants and the deportation of so many people? Secretary of State even commented that a visa can be revoked with no reason, as has happened to some Canadians. So we're going to be careful about what we say here and how we answer this question, not really looking to offend anyone, and quite frankly, not looking to get into any of the deeper issues behind a question like this or this particular topic. And I will say this, I think anytime you recruit international prospects, whether it's 2025 or 2015 or 2005, you got to make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, right? You've got to make sure you've covered everything on the paperwork side so you don't run into any hangups and leave guys in limbo about whether they can come to this country, whether they can go to college in this country, whether they can do this or do that in this country. I think that's always something that you've got to be mindful of. You've got to make sure you are extra diligent on the paperwork side of things. I think what may be unique about right now is, if in the past you had to be extra diligent about making sure everything was as it was supposed to be, now you have to be extra diligent about making sure everything is as it's supposed to be. You've got, you can't take any chances, particularly, as they're recruiting Henry Cody Lau and Roman Siulepa, the big Australian target who's still out there that I think Pitt is hoping to land and, would be a big part of this rotation. From a competitive athletics standpoint, you need to make sure you get that guy here. You need to make sure that you get him on campus and get him in school and get him practicing and training and all of those things. You don't want to be stuck. You don't want to lose a month of practice time with a kid like that because you didn't, help him handle the visa side of things correctly. So, if there's anything, given the current climate, the current political climate, as it relates to immigration, of all varieties, yeah, I think you have to be extra diligent in what you do. I don't know if it's taking an extra risk. I don't think the federal government is going to say, you know what, man, Pitt basketball has 2 Australians. Get them out of here. You know what I mean? I don't think they're going to hone in on that, but I do think it's probably a little bit more stringent, a little bit more difficult to get into this country. And so you've got to make sure you're doing everything you can to not create any hangups in the system, in the situation, right? And not create any delays or periods where the player, the prospective student athlete is in limbo. So that's probably my biggest, applying the current situation politically in this country to Pitt recruiting. That would be my biggest takeaway, is you've just got to make sure that you're doing everything you can to get them here legally, within the rules, and ideally in such a way that it's not going to come back on you and you're going to have to do more down the road to keep them here. So that would be my take on it, but who knows? All right, questions from this week. Jay Lazinger says, I cannot remember if I asked this prior, but has there been a philosophical shift in how Narduzzi recruits linebackers? It seems the current crop is more of a bigger safety that can cover instead of the lumbering run stoppers he originally seemed to prefer. Interesting. I don't know if it's a recent philosophical shift. Let me actually I'm going to bring up the commitment classes from like 2016 and on. 2016, I remember Kazon Pugh being in that group, and he eventually moved to defensive line. Chase Pine was in that group at linebacker. That kind of worked out, kind of didn't. Henry Miller was a defensive back that they ultimately moved there. Elias Reynolds was a bigger middle linebacker, didn't really work out for him. I guess as I think about that crew and kind of going forward, 2017, 2018, I'm just going to see who they recruited there before I speak on it entirely. But when I think of a guy like A.J. Roberts was a little bit bigger. I think they are mostly even in the 2017 class, they recruited Cam Bright. And Cam Bright was a guy who played all over the place for his high school. He played safety, but he had his hand on the ground playing like defensive end and was pretty productive at it. So Cam Bright, Phil Campbell was in the 2016 recruiting class, Phil Campbell was a converted safety. Albert Tucker was in that 2017 recruiting class. Again, he didn't work out, but, that was a converted safety. I'm going to look at 2018 now, too, because I sort of had the same impression you did that, he wanted those big lumbering guys. Wendell Davis in the 2018 class, a little bit bigger, but still not a big thumper. I don't think you would describe him that way. Who else? That might have been I think that was the only linebacker they took in 2018. But then you get to 2019, you get to like Servassier Dennis. And so I don't know if it's necessarily new. I think they've always liked these guys who are a little bit quicker, even if they're a little bit smaller. I mean, like you look at Cam Bright, you look at Phil Campbell, they tried to recruit Johnny Patrician, right? Into the 2015 class before he went to Penn State. Again, a smaller guy, a safety, who would ultimately end up playing linebacker. Albert Tucker, same thing. So, and then you get into Servassier Dennis in 2019, Bengali Kamara and Solomon Shields in 2020, and I think you work forward from there, and you're getting these types of guys. Preston Levant, I think, was the linebacker recruited in 2021. So I can rattle off the more recent years off the top of my head. I had to go back and look at 2016, 17, and 18 because my memory's not quite as fresh on those guys. But I think, as I rattle off those names, though, we're looking at guys that fit this mold of quicker outside linebackers, maybe a little bit smaller, but sacrificing size for speed if that's what it has to be. So a guy like Bengali Kamara or Rasheem Biles, I remember hearing stories in recruiting that other coaching staffs weren't sure. Are they big enough to play linebacker? Or no, actually the other way around. They're not big enough to play linebacker and they're not fast enough to play safety. Well, Pitt looks at it and says, you know what? We'll take that speed at outside linebacker, even if it means having players who are slightly smaller. Kyle Lewis is a smaller outside linebacker. The kid they just got a commitment from on Wednesday, John Wetzel from Latrobe, is currently 6 foot and 195. He's going to come in as a safety, but it's pretty clear that they think he's got the potential to grow into an outside linebacker. And so this is the mold, but I don't know that it's necessarily new or a shift. I felt the same way you did, honestly. Like when I read your question, I was like, yeah, they have really gone for this type of guy over the past few years. But then when you look back at it, Cam Bright, Phil Campbell, Albert Tucker, like this is the mold these guys were all along. This is what Pitt was going after all along. They didn't always find the right guys. And they didn't always pan out, but I mean, Cam Bright and Phil Campbell played a lot. Wendell Davis could have been pretty good. You know, I think he blew a play against Miami in 2021, I want to say it was, and just left the team shortly thereafter because he got benched for blowing that play. But I think he could have been, ended up being pretty good. I think where did he go? He went to like Northwestern or someplace, and I think he did a decent job out there. Either way, I think they've had this mold for a while. I don't think there's been a shift in the recruiting philosophy. And you could even look at like the first year or two when they move Elijah Zeiss from wide receiver to linebacker. They have Sean Idowu playing linebacker. He was like a safety-sized guy. So I think they've always had this approach. I think this is what they've wanted out of the linebackers. What's happened in the last 5 years or 4 years or so is they've really kind of honed in on what they want. I think they've gotten a great feel for what they want, what type of player they want, who fits well, and I think they've really dialed in their evaluation. Same thing at safety, and I think it's at outside linebacker as well, linebacker in general. And probably give a lot of credit to Ryan Manilak for that, for helping identify these guys. Kyle Lewis was a guy they liked even when he was committed to Temple. They got him late in that recruiting class, but it wasn't a matter of taking a late flyer. I think they wanted to flip him from Temple for a while, and then they finally were able to pull it off. That's a guy they identified, I think, relatively early. They liked him, and obviously it has panned out. Same thing with Rasheem Biles, Braylon Lovelace. What comes from Leesburg? What? Who? Where? They don't have any. The last D1 kid to come out of there was Braylon Lovelace's dad. But Pitt saw something that fit, and they've, obviously turned it into a lot of success. So I don't know if there was really a shift. I felt like there was, but I think when you look at how they've recruited going back to 2015, 2016, they've kind of been on this path for a while. Back to our questions here. 4422 Hike says, since we've discussed the importance of the offensive and defensive lines, looking at our past history, the importance of a field goal kicker has proven that they are needed to win football games. My question is, will we have a field goal kicker we can count on in 2025? Also, the last 2 years, the coverage teams have been horrible, as well as the receiving teams. What are your thoughts for improvement this year? I have questions about the field goal kicking. James London, not a lot of overly effusive reports coming out of him in spring camp, and he missed a kick in the spring game. Replacing Ben Sauls is not going to be easy. I don't know what the staff, I don't know how they felt when they recruited James London, if they thought, yeah, we're getting another Ben Sauls guy in right here. This is going to be the guy. Or if they felt like this guy will be a good enough kicker for us. He's going to have to get better, and he's going to have to get more consistent. That's just where that is. And I think Pitt fans appreciate the value of a good kicker. I think any Pitt fan who watched the Clemson game in 2016, or even a couple of the games a year earlier, the Syracuse game, the Georgia Tech game, that came down to long game-winning field goals from Chris Blewett. I think anybody who watched that should have an appreciation for good kicking, and certainly watching Ben Sauls over the last 3 years should have an appreciation for good kicking. I think it might be a little bit tough to replace him. As for the coverage teams, they didn't give up any return touchdowns last year. They gave up 2 kick return touchdowns in 2023, but they didn't give up any return touchdowns last season in 2024. I think, if the coverage units, if you want to say, well, they give up long returns, maybe. I'm sort of the mind, and maybe James London will be able to do this, or maybe somebody else will, or maybe they won't, but I'm sort of the mind anymore, just put it out of the end zone. Don't even bother allowing for a return. Don't bother trying to set up something where you tackle them inside the 15 or something like that. Just put it out of the end zone. Take away all possibility of an explosive play there, because kickoff returns and punt returns for touchdowns, and punting is a different story. You don't want to touch back every time there, but kickoff returns for touchdowns, can be game-changing events. Don't even leave the possibility out there. Kick it out of the end zone. If your leg is strong enough to kick it out of the end zone every time, do it. And that you don't have to even worry about the coverage unit or anything like that. As far as Pitt's return teams, I mean, I feel like it's sort of the same thing. They're just going to kick it out of the end zone. They're going to punt it away from Desmond Reed. And Desmond Reed should not be returning kicks this year, not because he's not good at it, but because he's just too valuable on offense. I think you have other guys you could probably put out there to return kicks and return punts. But if you get a chance to return one, good. My guess is you won't get many opportunities, just like they really didn't get many opportunities last year. Mike Sullivan, 2027, says, while we've retained Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, and Braylon Lovelace, Pitt has lost some linebackers this offseason. Do you expect Pitt to have problems with a lack of depth at linebacker next season, and who could make an impact as a backup? Yeah, Brandon George, Key Thompson gone to eligibility. They graduated. Jordan Bass transferred. Was there one more linebacker who transferred out? Either way, they've lost a handful of guys. That's for sure. I think the top end will be better. I think Lewis and Biles and Lovelace will all be better than they were a year ago, and so I think that gives you a great starting three. And then I think they'll go with youth in the depth. Jeremiah Marcelin and Cam Lindsey in particular. Jaden Bonsu coming in as a transfer from Ohio State. But I think Marcelin and Lindsey as redshirt freshmen, as redshirt freshmen, I think they're both redshirt freshmen. I don't think either guy played enough to, maybe Marcelin played enough to, either way, let's say Marcelin and Lindsey as second-year players. I think the staff is really high on those two guys. I think they are comfortable with those two guys providing the top two depth rotation pieces. And playing a lot and giving Kyle Lewis a breather, giving Braylon Lovelace a breather, giving Rasheem Biles a breather. I think it's not ideal to have second-year players with minimal experience as your top reserve linebackers, but I think those guys are pretty talented. I think those guys are going to be pretty good, and I think they can give Pitt good snaps in place of Lewis, Biles, and Lovelace and not have a – there's going to be a drop-off because Kyle Lewis is an All-American. Rasheem Biles is every bit the player. Braylon Lovelace is really good. He's played a ton. There's going to be some drop-off, but I think it'll be minimal and negligible, and if you mix and match, I think those guys are going to be able to make a pretty big impact. So I think Marcelin and Lindsey, I think we'll come out of this season talking pretty highly of Jeremiah Marcelin and Cam Lindsey. Mogul Buster says, there seems to be a whole lot of linebacker talk, but I have one too. If James Conner was recruited at Manilac, do you think he would make the starting three, and how good would he be? Wasn't he a defensive end? He's the perfect money size in this defense. Yeah, James Conner was a defensive end. I don't think they would have moved him to linebacker in this defense. I think James Conner would have, if he was going to, it'd be a question of whether he would ever make it to offense, but I think if he stayed on defense, he would be a defensive end. They would keep bulking him up, try and get him into the 250 range, 255, something like that, and let him just, be a beast off the edge, which he was. I don't know if they would have, ultimately moved him to running back, particularly in this offensive scheme. Maybe with Frank Cignetti or Sean Watson they might have, but I don't think they would have moved him to running back in the first place. They would have probably just kept him a defensive end, but I don't see him playing linebacker in this defense. Again, to the question, since we're getting a lot of linebacker questions here, to the question of, a different type or body type at linebacker, James Conner doesn't really fit with what this staff wants at outside linebacker. He's not built like Rasheem Biles or Kyle Lewis or Solomon DeShields or Bengali Kamara. And while he's got good speed for a guy his size and it makes him a real threat and a very effective running back, I'm not sure he would be a fit at linebacker in this defense. So, no, I don't see that happening. Big Husky 34 says, who are the three most likely recruits for Pitt to land during official visits? Well, just looking at the first weekend of official visits, I like Pitt's chances with Lincoln Hoke a lot, the defensive tackle from North Allegheny. I think they've got a great chance of landing him. Mike Vanderord, an offensive lineman from St. Ignatius. I think there's a really good chance there. I wouldn't be surprised to see Pitt land him. And then one of these, fast guys from Florida or Georgia, like Kaj Baker, 5'7" guy, small back, from Somerset Academy Charter in Florida. I could see somebody like him, or Jaden Dunbar, wide receiver from Georgia, who's actually a big guy. He's a 6'5" wide receiver, one of the biggest receivers they're targeting. He dropped his official visit to Georgia and rescheduled official visit to Pitt. Or even Damon Ferguson, another speedy guy. He's from Maryland, actually. I could see them landing any one of those guys along with, or maybe a couple of those guys, actually, along with Lincoln Hoke, Mike Vanderord, and a few of the others. We've currently got about 20 or so official visits more or less confirmed for that first weekend in June 5th, 6th, and 7th. I think they'll do really well. Now, a handful of those guys are already committed. 5 of those 20 or 22 are already committed, but I think they'll do well with the other guys that are coming in, those uncommitted prospects. That first weekend tends to be a very productive one, and I think it will be for Pitt again this year. All right, Potter County native says, if something happens with Brandy Bates, does Pitt promote from within with Corey Sanders or Ryan Manilak, or go outside the program? Who are you buying in on to replace Bates if health problems drive in retirement? Health or age or whatever it might be, if at some point in the near future Randy Bates steps down, my gut says Ryan Manilak would be the choice to be the defensive coordinator. They made Corey Sanders that assistant head coach or associate head coach, whatever his title is. I think Corey Sanders is a hugely valuable piece of this program. I think there's a lot of respect in giving him that position, that position that was previously held by Charlie Partridge. I think there's a lot of respect there for Corey Sanders, and deservedly so. I think he's done a great job. But I sort of feel like Manilak's the next guy in line to be the coordinator. So he would probably be that would be my guess. I can't say it would be my pick. I don't know enough about how these guys are behind the scenes to say I have a pick, but that would be my guess on who gets the job next, and I think he'll probably do a pretty good job. I think he's a really smart guy, knows the defense well, does a good job coaching. I think he'd probably be the next choice. All right, final one. Smenges says, first and second concession stand food you'll purchase at the Pitt 2025 football opener. I haven't bought food at a Pitt football game in I don't know how long. I don't even know what concessions they have at Acrisure. Do they have Chicky and Pete's at Acrisure Stadium? If they have Chicky and Pete's, I would get some Chicky and Pete's. If they don't, I don't know what I would get. Nachos? I'm always a big fan of ballpark nachos, but I don't even know. Does Acrisure Stadium have nachos like PNC Park does? I don't know, because I can't tell you the last time I bought a concession there, because every time I'm there, I'm just working, man. Maybe I'll bring a Kind Bar or something like that, and that'll be my concession. But at PNC Park, I'll get some nachos, get some Chicky and Pete's, those kinds of things. But nothing at Acrisure. So you tell me, what do you guys like to eat at Acrisure Stadium? I'd like to hear your picks there. All right, great questions this week. As always, thanks to you guys for coming through with the questions here on the Morning Pitt Mailbag. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. And then, as always, go check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, to get all of the Pitt coverage you can possibly handle. Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, transfer portal. It's all there at Panther-Lair.com. And message boards to hang out with other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Thanks for watching the videos all week. I hope you've had a great week. You got a long weekend coming up, so enjoy it. We'll have a Morning Pitt for you on Monday, even though it's Memorial Day. We'll have something for you, so you can look forward to that. I think we'll be talking a little bit of recruiting as that first official visit weekend is getting close. So make sure you tune in for that one. All right, like and subscribe. Have a great weekend, and we will catch up with you on Monday for the Morning Pitt right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.